Imagine being accused of squatting at your own cabin in front of neighbors, and law enforcement's end, proving not only that it's yours, but that you own their homes too. Imagine pulling into a place you've known your entire life only to have someone tell you that you don't belong there. Thought was the situation facing Silas Trenholm on a warm Friday afternoon in early June. Had driven nearly 3 hours from Charlotte, his old pickup stacked with fishing gear, a cooler packed with food, and a battered binder of documents he carried everywhere when it came to land. For him, this wasn't just a weekend retreat, it was a return to the one place where he felt his grandfather's presence. Moose Lake shimmered in the sunlight, framed by tall pines that stretched toward the sky. Silas eased the truck down the gravel path, each turn of the wheels crunching against the stone sand parked near the cabin his family had built decades earlier. The cabin wasn't much to look at, wood darkened by time, a front porch sagging just slightly, and a tin roof that rattled in storms. But to Silas, it was perfect. It wasn't about appearances, it was about roots. As he stepped out, he let out a long breath, taking in the fresh smell of water and earth. Finally, he muttered. Setting his boots onto the ground like they belonged there, he pulled his rod from the back, checked the tackle box, and smiled to himself. After weeks of long contracts and demanding clients, finally had space to breathe. But here's the thing, Silas wasn't just any man with a weekend getaway. Over the years, while others were busy arguing at town meetings or building subdivisions, Silas had been making quiet moves, buying land, negotiating parcels, signing deals when others didn't even notice. Signed deals when others didn't even notice. Eond was also called in a law of seed. Aeons compito with seld made the eond with seldi. Eons competing with seldi, compito with seldi. Eons continuo competi. Compito comede. Go wide said. It's a pendide, baya and goded. It's idly lie its guy and sapai sikakai ties a beget. Kaya klayu sikakapatakapai like tides. It's it to capulic it bees look to dub that sipped up muded suffered by so eventually, piece by piece, he ended up holding deeds to almost everything surrounding that lake. Road shorelines, even the wooded trails people used without a second thought, they all fell under his name. Silas owned more than most knew, and he liked to keep it that way. He carried his cooler inside, setting it on the worn kitchen counter. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and dust, but it was home. He pulled back the cortain sledding sunlight filter across the wooden floorboards. He set down his grandfather's pocket knife on the table. A ritual of sorts, every visit began and ended with that knife in plain view. A reminder of the Monroe taught him what hard work meant. Just as he was preparing to head back out for more gear, Silas heard something unusual. It wasn't the call of birds or the rustle of leaves. It was a sharp voice cutting through the still air. Excuse me. What do you think you're doing? He turned to see a woman marching up the drivy whore posture, stiff, her sunglasses flashing like mirrors in the sun. She wore a red blouse and carried a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her stride was quick, her tone sharpened. Her eyes locked on him like he was trespassing in her backyard. Silas wiped his hands on his gents afternoon. Can help you with something? The woman planted herself at the edge of the porch. Step size, you can explain why you're unloading things at this property. Are you renting it because we have strict rules about short-term stays here? Silas tilted his head, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Renting it, ma'am. This is my cabin. She gave a tight laugh kind people use when they don't believe a word you've said. That's not possible. This area falls under the jurisdiction of the Lakeview Homeowners Association. And I don't recall approving anyone by your Namahai. Let out a slow breath, already sensing this wasn't going to be a 2-minute conversation. Silas Trenholm. My family's owned this place for generations. Maybe you're mistaken, but she crossed her arms unmoved. I don't make mistakes about property in this community. My name is Marjorie Kincaid, president of the association, And if you don't have documentation showing you belong here, you'll need to leave immediately. The words hit him like a sudden storm. After years of working, buying, and protecting this land, Bong told he was an intruder here. Almost felt comical, almost. He studied her expression, to land. Realized she wasn't joking. Silas rubbed the back of his neck. I think you're a little out of line, Mrs. Kinraid. You don't know who you're talking to. But her glare only hardened dawned. In that instant, he understood this confrontation was just beginning. But before Silas could explain himself, Marjorie doubled down, setting the stage for a clash that would soon draw more eyes than either of them expected. Silas leaned against the porch rail, his arms, thumbs folded loosely, watching the woman in front of him as if she had walked straight out of a board meeting and into his driveway. Her tone, her stance, even the clipboard clutched under her arm, it all screamed authority, or at least the need to project it. Marjorie Kincaid didn't back down. Narrowed her eyes behind her sunglasses. I asked you a question, Mr. Trenholmer. You renting this place or squatting? Because either way, you're in violation of our community's standard. Silas chuckled under his breath, a dry sound, and shook his head. Squatting, Gladdy. I've been coming to this cabin since I was a boy. My father brought me here before you were even thinking about HOA bylaws, and you're standing on my land right now. That only seemed to provoke her furthers. Stepped closer, heels crunching against the gravel, her voice rising. Neuer mistaken all the lakefront property around here is under the authority of the Lakeview Association. We've had issues with people sneaking in, renting out cabins, throwing parties. I'm not about to let some strangers set a precedent. Silas's jaw worked slowly as he studied her. Could feel his patience thinning, but he wasn't about to let anger lead. That wasn't his why. Don't know what you think you know, ma'am, but I assure you this cabin's mini-ninned. So is the land around it, every foot of it. Her laugh was short, sharp, like a gavel hitting a desk. You expect me to believe that one man owns all of this? She waved her hand toward the tree lineth. Lake shimmering in the background. That's absurd. Do you even hear yourself, eyes? Silas said simply, meeting her stare. I do. For a moment there was silence between them, kind of silence that weighs heavy like two boxers circling each other, waiting for the next movie. Pair of kayakers drifting on the water slowed down, noticing the exchange. Even a jogger on the far path paused, pulling an earbud out to listen. Marjorie broke the silence. First listen, Mr. Trenholm, or whoever you claim to be. I don't know what scheme you're running, but rules are rules. If you don't provide documentation immediately, I'll have to contact the authorities. Silas exhaled, long and measured. He wasn't shocked that much was clear from the steady look in his eyes to seen people like Marjorie before, people who believed authority was theirs by default too, assumed their word carried more weight than the truth itself. But the way she dismissed him so quickly struck something deeper. Ma'am, he said, voice steady, I don't answer to your rules. I've got more paperwork in that cabin than you've got in that clipboard. Deeds signed, sealed, and recorded. My grandfather bought the first plot back in 1949. I've been buying up land ever since. You can call whoever you want, but nothing changes. The fact that this is Menaeus's words didn't move her. If anything, her grip on the clipboard tightened. You can talk all you want, but talk doesn't prove a thing. You're standing on HOA controlled property that's trespassing. Silas raised an eye, retrospassing. On my own porch. He couldn't help but laugh, the absurdity bubbling up despite the tension. Lady, you're standing on my land right now, accusing me of being where I've been since I was 12 years old. If anyone's trespassing, it might be you. That line drew the first ripple from the small crowd gathering at a distance. A few neighbors shifted closer. Whispering phones began to appear in hand screens, glowing as lenses captured the exchange. Marjorie noticed the attention, but refused to back down. She lifted her chin. Enough of this. I've asked you nicely. If you don't pack up and leave, you'll have no choice but to call the sheriff. Silas didn't flinch. He stared at her for a long moment, then glanced at the gathering neighbors. Go ahead, he said, finally, voice calm, almost weary. Call them. I'll be right here when they come." The words hung in the air. Marjorie shifted on her feet, clearly expecting him to panic or scramble for an excuse. Instead, his calm only unsettled her more than think. "I won't," she shot back, fishing her phone from her purse. Her fingers flew across the screen as she muttered into the receiver, "Yes, I need deputies at Lakeview Subdivision immediate. Telliers. A suspicious man refusing to leave private property." She shot Silas a pointed look as though trying to prove a point. "Yes, he's being hostile." Silas let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Hostile, lady, the only thing hostile here is your attitude." Neighbors caught that line, and a couple of them chuckled under their breath. Marjorie spun toward them, her voice sharp. "This isn't a joke. You all know we have rules. You'll thank me later when this man is gone." But the neighbors didn't look convinced, and Silas, he stayed rooted where he stood, calm as ever, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. But the sound of sirens approaching in the distance compromised that the standoff was far from over. The faint wail of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the water and cutting through the heavy summer air. Neighbors edged closer, phones angled discreetly, but not discreet enough. The scene had shifted from a simple argument into something everyone wanted to witness. Silas remained on the porch, arms crossed, leaning slightly on one leg, as if this were just another day. He looked more amused than threatened, though there was a quiet steel in his eyes that said he wasn't going anywhere. Marjorie, on the other hand, stood rigid, phone still clutched tightly, her chest rising and falling quickly. She turned to the gathering crowd, lifting her voice so everyone could hear. "You see, this is why we have rules, to keep outsiders from squatting on our property. If we let one slip through, what happens next? More people sneaking in, ignoring regulations, lowering property values." Silas cut her off, his voice steady and louder. "Now, outsider lady, I've been fishing this lake since I was tall enough to hold a rod. My father taught me to cast right down there off the dock. My grandfather cleared this land with his own hands. You're standing in front of the man who owns more ground here than anyone else alive." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. A couple of neighbors exchanged looks, one whispering, "Wait, did he just say he owns the land?" Another pulled up the county property records on her phone, curiosity etched across her face. Marjorie didn't acknowledge the whisper. She locked her eyes on Silas like he'd just insulted her directly. "That's a lie, pure and simple. No one man owns this much. And if you think waving family stories around is going to change the fact that you're trespassing, you're mistaken." Silas gave her a long look. "You want proof? Fine, when the deputies get here, I'll show them what I've got. But let me warn you, Mrs. Kincaid, when you find out the truth, it's not going to be me standing here embarrassed." That jab landed. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but instead of retreating, she stepped closer, climbing the first step of the porch. "Don't you dare threaten me. No people like you, men who think they can bend rules to fit themselves. You probably sweet-talked some clerker took advantage of a loophole, but in this community we follow order." Silas didn't move, his eyes narrowed slightly. "Mom, I don't need loopholes. I've got signed deeds stamped by the county, filed fair and square. You want to talk? Order is when people respect the truth, not when they bully others because they don't like what they hear." The neighbors shifted. A gay-known man in a baseball cap called out, "Hey Marjorie, maybe let the deputies sort this out. No harm in checking the paperwork." Before making accusations, she spun toward him, voice sharp. "This isn't your concern, Harold. Stay out of it." Harold lifted his palms, but didn't back away, saying the guy doesn't look like he's hiding anything. That little comment only fueled her fires. Turned back to Silas. "You see what you're doing, undermining authority, stirring doubt, dividing the community. That's exactly what I won't allow." Silas laughed softly. "Or doing a fine job of that yourself." The sirens cut off abruptly as two sheriff's cruisers rolled up the gravel path. Lights still flashing, the tension tightened. Every eye now fixed on the scene. Two deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts. Scanning the situation, Afternoon called out, his tone professional. But cautious, what seems to be the issue? Here Marjorie immediately straightened, marching toward them like she was leading the charge officers, thank goodness. Your Harethus man is trespassing on private property. He refuses to leave. He's hostile and disruptive. I demand he be removed immediately. Silas remained where he was, his voice calm but carrying across the yard afternoon officers' names. Silas Trenholm, this is my cabin, and before you listen to another word of nonsense, you've got a stack of deeds in that binder inside, proving not just this property, but the land around it belongs to meth. Deputies exchanged a look, their expressions shifting from casual to cautious curiosity. One of them raised a handle. Right. Let's take this one step at a time, ma'am. You'll have your chance, but first, sir, you got identification and documents to back up your claim? Sure do. Silas replied, turned, opened the cabin door, and walked inside slowly, returning with a thick binder under his arm. He placed it on the porch rail and flipped it open. The sound of paper and plastic sleeves rustling filled the silence. Marjorie scoffed loudly. He could have printed anything off the internet. Doesn't mean it's legitimate. Silas didn't even look at her. He slid one deed toward the deputy, pointing to the official seal and recording number filed at the county office. You can call and confirm it right now. I've got dozens more just like it. The deputy leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he examined the document. Lifted his radio. Dispatch, need a quick check on property records for a Silas Trenholm Lakeside parcel recorded May 12, 2008. The air grew heavier. Neighbors whispered. Phones recorded every second. Silas stood calm, his hand resting lightly on the binder. Marjorie, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably, though her mouth still worked, firing off under her breath fake loopholes. Manipulation. But as the deputy waited for the response over his radio, the balance of power in the yard began to shift, and everyone could feel it. Crackle of the deputy's radio filled the charged silence. Every head turned toward his shoulder. Micah's dispatch responded, copy that. Records show property at Lakeside parcel is listed under Silas Trenholm. Multiple adjoining parcels also under his name confirmed. Over. The deputy raised his eyebrows, looking from the document in his hand to the man standing calmly on the porch. Well, he muttered. Checks out. The crowd of neighbors buzzed with low chatter, phones tilted higher. A woman near the back whispered, she really call 911 on the guy who owns the whole place. Another laughed, nervously covering her mouth. But Marjorie wasn't ready to give up. She stepped forward, her voice sharp, carrying over the murmurs. No, that can't be right. He's lying, or there's some mistake in the system. Officers, don't you see what's happening? Hurries manipulating the records. People like him find ways to people like Silas. Interrupted, his tone calm but edged. He fixed his eyes on her, and for a moment noise of the crowd seemed to vanish. You don't even know me. You didn't ask who I was. Didn't ask where I'm from. You saw a man unloading gear at his own cabin and decided, I didn't belong. That says more about you than it does about me. The deputy cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Ma'am, the records are clear. Mr. Trenholm owns this cabin and a good deal more land. Busy Sears. No trespass here. Marjorie's face flushed, but she doubled down. I don't care what the records say. This community has rules. We have bylaws, regulations. He's not above those. Silas lifted his binder again, pulling out another set of papers. Actually, I am, because every road you drive, every path you jog, every dock you fish from, it's all on land. That Ionyar Association has no authority over me, and it never has. Gasps rippled through the group. Simone, in the back, muttered, is that true? Can he really own all? Thatch another answered. Looks like it. Marjorie's voice climbed higher, teetering on the edge of panic. Is outrageous. You can't let one man control everything. Officers do something. Arrest him if you have to. One of the deputies raised a hand firmly. Ma'am, that's enough. Hasn't broken any laws. You made the call, we came, and we've verified the property. Records unless you have evidence of a crime. This matter's resolved. Marjorie stared at them in disbelief, mouth opening and closing without sound. Her grip on the clipboard was so tight their knuckles whitened. Finally, she blurted, "This is harassment." "He's harassing my Silas," let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. "Lady, I've said less than 10 sentences. You walked up my drive. The only person doing the harassing here is the one shouting at me in front of a crowd." Neighbors chuckled. Even the deputies exchanged a glance, the corner of one's mouth twitching. Marjorie spun toward the crowd, desperate now. "Don't you see, if we let him claim all this power, he'll ruin everything we've built. He'll tear apart this community. Property values will plummet. Rules will mean nothing." But the crowd didn't look convinced anymore. A man holding his phone said aloud, "Seems to me the only one tearing the community apart is standing right there with the clipboard." Lauder broke out, low at first, then louder. The sound of it struck Marjorie harder than Silas's calm defiance ever had. She raised her chin, but her eyes darted nervously toward the flashing red light of half a dozen cameras. Silas turned back to the deputy's voice, "Even am I free to go about my day now? I was hoping to get some fishing in before dark." The deputy nodded. "You're clear, Mr. Trenholm. Sorry for the trouble. You're well within your rights to be here." Silas gave a small nod of thanks. "No trouble, officer. Not for me anyway." Words landed like a stone dropped in water. Marjorie stiffened, her face red as whispers spread through the neighbors like wildfires. Opened her mouth to argue again, but no words came. For the first time that day seemed out of breath. The deputies began to step back toward their cruisers, satisfied the situation had been resolved. Silas knew better. He could see it in Marjorie's eyes. This wasn't over, not for her bet, before the cruisers even pulled away. Marjorie found her second wind, determined to claw back the control that had just slipped through her fingers. The two sheriffs' cruisers idled with their lights still flashing, throwing red and blue streaks across the gravel and trees. The deputies hadn't left yet. They were lingering, partly because they sensed the situation wasn't finished, and partly because half the neighborhood had gathered. With phones held high, Silas stayed on the porch, binder under one arm, calm, as Stana had nothing left to prove. But Marjorie Kin sate, her cheeks flushed, her jaw tight. Wasn't done, not by a long shot, officers. She called out sharply, stepping forward, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. "You can't just walk away from thieves. May have papers, but there's no way one man can own this much land. It's impossible." Check again. Own deputy, a broad-shouldered man named Deputy Walker, sighed audibly. "Ma'am, we checked records are official. Multiple parcels filed under his name, dating back years. That's not a mistake." But Marjorie shook her head furiously. "Paperwork can be forged. Clerks can be bribed. I've been running this association for 12 years, and not once has anyone mentioned his supposed authority. If he really owns all this, why is he just now showing up?" Silas leaned forward, slightly, his voice even but pointed. "Because I don't have to answer to you. That's why I've been coming here for decades quietly, without needing your approval. And now that I've finally decided to spend more time, Harrow decided I don't belong. That's the only reason we're standing here." Arguinthy crowd muttered agreement. Someone near the back said loudly enough for everyone to hear right, "I've seen him here before. Never caused trouble." The other Depucha, younger man named Deputy Perez, turned toward Marjorie, his patience thinning. "Mum, I'm going to be direct, calling 911 for a civil matter. Like this isn't what emergency lines are. Fourth man hasn't committed a crime. You've accused him without evidence. If this continues." The two sheriff's cruisers idled, their lights painting the tranquil lake scene in frantic pulses of red and blue. The deputies, Walker and Perez, hadn't yet climbed back into their vehicles. They stood, a silent barrier between the simmering outrage of Marjorie Kincaid and the imperturbable calm of Silas Trenholm. The air, thick with humidity and tension, seemed to vibrate with the unsaid things hanging between them all. Marjorie's chest heaved, her knuckles bone white around the clipboard she held like a talisman against the unraveling of her world. The deputy's confirmation of Silas's ownership wasn't a conclusion to her. It was a procedural error, a glitch in the system she was determined to correct. "Officers, she began again, her voice a strained, sharp instrument. "You can't just walk away from this. He may have papers, but there's no way one man can own this much land. It's impossible. Check again. There must be a parent company, a trust, something." Deputy Walker, the older of the two, let out a long, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 similar neighborhood disputes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "we checked. The records are official, clear, and current. Multiple parcels, all filed under Silas P. Trenholm, dating back decades. That's not a mistake. It's a fact. But facts were malleable things to Marjorie when they contradicted her authority. She shook her head, a tight, furious motion. Paperwork can be forged. Clerks can be bribed. I've been the president of this association for 12 years. 12 years. And not once, in any meeting, any budget review, any property line discussion, has anyone ever mentioned his name or his supposed authority. If he really owns all this," she spat, jabbing a finger toward Silas, who hadn't moved from his porch rail, "why is he just now showing up? Where has he been?" All eyes turned to Silas. He didn't look at the deputies or the gawking neighbors. His gaze was fixed on Marjorie, but it wasn't angry. It was almost pitying. He leaned forward slightly, his work-roughened hands resting on the binder. "Because I don't have to answer to you," he said, his voice even but carrying an undeniable finality. "That's why. I've been coming here for decades, quietly, without needing your permission or your approval or a stamp from your association. I fish. I sit on that porch. I remember my grandfather. And now that I've decided I want to spend more of my time here. You saw a man in an old truck unloading gear, and you decided, based on nothing but your own presumption, that I didn't belong. That's the only reason we're standing here. It's not because of any crime, because of your pride." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. A man in a faded flannel shirt nodded. "He's right, Marjorie. I've seen his truck here for years. Always figured he was some relative of the old family that owned the land. Never caused a lick of trouble. That's not the point." Marjorie's voice climbed, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "The point is order. The point is rules. If we let one person flout the bylaws, then what's next? Everyone will do it. Our property values will crumble. This community will become a free-for-all." It was Deputy Perez, the younger officer, who finally cut in, his patience visibly exhausted. "Ma'am," he said, stepping forward, his tone firm and leaving no room for argument, "I'm going to be very direct. Calling 911 for a civil property dispute, especially after the legal owner has been confirmed, is a misuse of emergency services. Mr. Trenholm hasn't committed any crime. You made an accusation without evidence. If this continues, if you harass him further or make another false report, you could be facing charges yourself. Obstruction, filing a false report. Is that what you want?" The words "false report" seemed to physically strike her. She took a half-step back, her bluster momentarily deflated. The reality of her position standing on another man's property, in front of half the neighborhood, and to law enforcement officers, accusing him of a crime he didn't commit, finally began to pierce the armor of her self-righteousness. Her eyes darted from the stern faces of the deputies to the cell phones still held aloft, their tiny lenses capturing her humiliation for posterity. Silas watched the fight drain from her. He saw the moment her indignation curdled into something colder and more bitter. Shame. He felt no triumph, only a deep, weary sense of closure. The deputies, seeing her retreat, gave a final warning nod. "The matter is closed, ma'am," Walker said. "Have a good day, Mr. Trenholm." With that, they finally turned, climbed into their cruisers, and killed the flashing lights. The sudden silence they left behind was deafening. The cruisers crunched slowly back down the gravel drive, leaving the assembled neighbors and a mortified Marjorie Kincaid in their wake. For a long moment, no one moved. The spectacle was over, but the audience remained, unsure how to disperse. All eyes were on Marjorie, waiting for her next move. She stood, frozen, a statue of defeated authority, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. It was Silas who broke the silence. He didn't address her. Instead, he turned his gaze to the neighbors, the curious, the sympathetic, the neutral observers who made up the community she claimed to protect. The deputies mentioned it's a civil matter, he said, his voice loud and clear, carrying easily in the quiet afternoon air. And they're right. But since we're all here, and since there seems to be a lot of confusion about who owns what, maybe we should clear it up, once and for all.